Welcome everyone to the online training module 3, but now focusing on lesson 3. Lesson 3 looks at data correction instruments and the concept of triangulation. And this lesson will cover data needs for impact evaluation, triangulation in data collection of primary data, and collection of secondary data. But first, let's look at the needs for data for impact evaluation. As you will recall, impact evaluation sets out to gather evidence of impacts and examine how the intended impacts were achieved, or why they were not achieved, or why they were underachieved. An example could be positive changes in under 5 modality rates for a particular program. So this process requires also to collect data about the context in which those changes, those outcomes or impacts were generated. An example would be looking at a country's normative and legal framework that affects child protection in our under 5 modality rates example, the appropriateness and quality of program activities or policy implementation, and other similar aspects. To put the examination of impacts into context. It is therefore particularly important for evaluators to check whether baseline data are available for the selected indicators or not. If baseline data are unavailable, it means additional data should be collected in order to reconstruct baselines that will provide an understanding of what the situation was like before the intervention. And this can be done through using recall, for example, asking people to recollect specific information about an event or experience that occurred in the past. When it comes to data, they are generally categorized into 2, primary and secondary data. Primary data are data collected afresh for the first time, and so they are original data, corrected for a specific task or objective. While secondary data, these are data already collected by someone else and have already gone through analysis or statistical processes. And of course, they were corrected for a specific task or objective for another study. However, each type of data requires different correction method. And well-chosen and well-implemented methods for data correction are key for impact evaluations or any other evaluation. Now let's look at the concept of triangulation of data sources. You may recall in our area modules that you covered some aspects of triangulation, looking at using different research methods, conducting multiple sources of data, having multiple participants, beneficiaries, key stakeholders, etc. But here we are looking at the use of a variety of methods or sources of data in a single impact evaluation. You may recall further why this is done. One is to overcome the weaknesses inherent in each method when used alone. 2, it can also help deepen our understanding of the program or policy, its effects and context, among others. Therefore, triangulation helps the evaluators to compare information from different independent sources. And that's very important, particularly because it helps to increase the credibility of the evaluation findings, especially when information from different data sources converges. In the same concept of triangulation, which is also commonly known as mixing of different methods or of approaches, researchers must address some key questions when they're determining different methods to be used in an impact evaluation. Number one is to look at what stage of the evaluation to mix methods. Number two, whether methods will be used sequentially or concurrently. That means whether the study will start with secondary data examination, which will then inform what kind of primary data to be corrected. So in that sequence, in that order, or both secondary data and primary data being examined at the same time, that is concurrently. Another important question is whether qualitative or quantitative methods will be given relatively equal weighting or not. So in some cases, more weight could be given to secondary data and less to primary data. While in others, more weight will be attached to primary data and less to secondary data. That has to be determined in advance. Therefore, a particular analytic framework and the choice of specific data analysis methods will depend also on the purpose of the impact evaluation and the type of key evaluation questions that evaluators must consider. For example, if the evaluation question is descriptive, it means it requires data analysis methods that involve both quantitative data and qualitative data. If it is a causal evaluation question, then it requires a research design that will address one element of attribution, whether or not observed changes are due to the intervention or external factors, but also contribution, to what extent the intervention caused the observed changes. If it is an evaluative question, then it requires strategies for synthesis that apply the evaluative criteria to the data to answer the key evaluation questions. So all these will also help evaluators to determine the kind of methods and how they can mix them up to help them answer the evaluation questions. Defining upfront or in advance what constitutes success by constructing specific evaluative rubrics or standards or level of performance of the program or policy can provide a basis on which the collected information can be systematically combined. Now let's look at correction of primary data. What methods are available for correction of primary data? There are a number of methods, but for this purpose, we'll look at the following. One, observation, then look at interview method, which is divided into personal and telephone interview. Then look at the questionnaire method, then the schedule method, then focus group discussions, and finally, but not the least, key informant interviews. Observation method. This is one of the powerful methods used for correction of data in research. And observation becomes a scientific tool and method of data collection when the following are met. One, when it serves a formulated research purpose. At the same time, it is systematically planned and recorded, and is subjected to checks and controls on validity and reliability. So under observation method, the information is collected by way of investigators' own direct observation without asking from the respondent. An example could be in a food security improvement program. The evaluator, instead of asking the farmer to explain their food situation or crop production situation, can observe the performance of crops in the field directly and get information about food security. So this method is generally independent of the respondent's willingness to respond. As such, it is relatively less demanding of active cooperation of the respondent, as is the case with interview or questionnaire method, which we will see later. It's also important to note that this method is particularly suitable in studies which deal with subjects who are not capable of giving verbal reports of their feelings for one reason or another, or subjects that are difficult or not cooperative. So it becomes a useful method for data collection. Number 2 is interview method, which is split into personal and telephone interviews. And a personal interview method, the interviewer asks questions generally in a face-to-face contact situation to the other person or persons. And personal interviews may be in the form of direct personal investigation, or it may be indirect oral investigation. What's the difference? In the case of direct personal investigation, the interviewer has to collect information personally from the sources concerned. They have to interview the participant or the target individual. But there are certain cases where such an approach may not be possible, or possible but not worthwhile, or it could be due to extensive scope of inquiry, difficult geographical terrain. In such cases, an indirect oral examination can be conducted. So the interviewer cross-examines other persons who are supposed to have the knowledge of the issue or issues under investigation. So the interviews involve the use of a set of predetermined questions, which are highly standardized in terms of recording. So these questions guide the interviews. The other form of interviews is telephone or online, which involves collecting information by contacting the respondents or participants via telephone or online. This could be emails, etc. So the questions could be sent to the respondents via emails or through calls by telephone or online calls. We have so many platforms now. It could be Skype, it could be WhatsApp, and other such facilities, technologies. However, in the past, or in some areas, it is not a very widely used method, but it plays an important part in evaluations or surveys. However, in the recent developments of technologies, but also pandemics like COVID-19 and other similar challenges, these methods have become fundamental approaches to data collection. And let's move on to questionnaire method. In this method, a questionnaire is developed and sent to the persons or to the identified persons with a request to them to answer the questions and return the questionnaire back to the evaluators. So a questionnaire is a self-report data collection instrument that each research participant or respondent must complete as part of the research. The questionnaire is sent or mailed to the respondents who are expected to read and understand the questions and write down the answers to those questions in the spaces provided on the questionnaire itself. So the respondents have to answer the questions on their own in the absence of the evaluator or the interviewer. The schedule method. This method is very much like the questionnaire method, but there's a little difference between the two. The difference is that in schedule method, the proforma containing a set of questions or the schedule which has a set or a list of questions is being filled in by the enumerator or interviewer who is specifically appointed for the purpose. These enumerators or interviewers, or in other contexts, they may be referred to as research assistants, along with schedules, go to the respondent, put to them the questions in the order the questions are listed in the proforma or the schedule, and record the replies in the spaces in the proforma. So the difference between a questionnaire and a schedule is that in a questionnaire, the proforma or the questionnaire is given to a respondent to answer in the absence of the interviewer or the evaluator. While in a schedule, the evaluator goes with the schedule to the respondent, sits down with the respondent and asks questions and take down the responses from the respondent. Now, it is important, therefore, that there is proper selection and training of enumerators or research data collectors. Then let's move on to focus group discussion. Why focus? It is called focus for many reasons. But first, a focus group is a type of a group process in which the moderator or facilitator leads discussion with a small group of individuals to examine in more detail how the group members think or feel about a specific topic of interest. It is called a focus group because the moderator keeps the individuals in the group focused on a specific topic for discussion. The moderator generates group discussion through the use of open-ended questions and acts as the facilitator of the group discussion process. Focus groups are used to collect qualitative data that are in the word of the group participants. So this is unlike the schedule or questionnaire, which already has, in the case of a structured questionnaire, which has a list of responses where the respondent has to tick from the given list. In focus group, the questions are open-ended with no predetermined answers. And the answers are recorded from what the respondents or the members of the group are providing. Generally, a focus group can be composed of 6 to 12 people. In other cases, can go up to 15 participants who are purposely selected because they can provide specific information of interest to the researcher or evaluation process. And generally, a focus group is homogeneous. And in practice, about 2 to 4, even in some cases 5 focus group discussions are sufficient to generate useful information. From focus group discussions, let's move on to key informant interviews. So key informant interviews are qualitative, in-depth interviews with people who are likely to provide specific needed information or ideas or insights on a particular subject. This could be a program or a project or a policy. Key informant interviews are conducted using interview guides that list topics or issues that need to be covered during those key informant interviews or interviews with the key informants. And the interviewer will have to probe informants to get more information and take elaborate notes that can be developed later after the interviews. If all the relevant items are not covered in the session, the interviewer has a chance to go back to the key informant and ask for more information or clarification on some issues. And key informant interviews are unstructured in nature, and the number of people, key informants, that needs to be interviewed depends on the data needs, one, but also availability of time and resources. So all those things considered, typically 15 to 35 interviews are needed or can be sufficient for the study. Now let's look at collection of secondary data. As we indicated earlier, secondary data, these are data that are already available, collected for another study in the past. And the sources of secondary data are many. This could be publications from the government, publications from international bodies or foreign government, books, magazines, reports, reports by research scholars, universities, economists, and other different sources. However, it's important for evaluators that before using secondary data, the following aspects need to be checked. One, reliability of data. Key questions must be asked by evaluator before using that secondary data. Under this, who collected the data? What were the sources of data? Were the data collected using proper methods? Was there any bias of the compiler? And what level of accuracy was desired? And was it achieved? So these are key questions that the evaluator must ask to establish reliability of the secondary data considered. Then they must also look at suitability of the data. Is it suitable for the current evaluation exercise or not? They must also look at adequacy of the data. Is it adequate? What areas are lacking, etc. Now, when it comes to selection of appropriate method for data collection, there are also a number of factors that the evaluators need to consider. One is the nature, scope, and objective of the inquiry or the evaluation. So should ask whether secondary data or primary data are to be used, both or one of the two. Another aspect is availability of funds. Do we have adequate funds to support correction of data or the kind of data that is needed? And then the time element. How much time is available? Is it adequate? Then precision required. What level of precision do we need? So all these factors collectively can help evaluators to select a method of data collection that is appropriate for that particular impact evaluation study. Thank you for your attention.